expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX's board, staff, or underwriters.
Good day, and you are listening to Ability Radio. I'm one of your hosts, Amelia Headley-Lamont of the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands, and today we have two women who are artists who are doing a two-women show called Fabric and Silhouettes. Generational Synergy that will be at the Cane Roots Art Gallery now until May 16th of 2025. Our guests today are Elisa McKay and Pedra Chaffers. Good day, ladies.
Good day. Good day.
Good day.
And
how are you?
I'm fine and so pleased and privileged to hear from you both because you have both contributed mightily to our artistic world here in our little Virgin Islands and beyond. And so what I wanted to do is at least let our audience know who is Elisa McKay, who is Pedra Chaffers, your relationship to this community. So Elisa, let me start with you. If you can just give us a little background.
Okay, where do I start? I'm a New Yorker, maybe, but I've been living in the Virgin Islands on St. Croix since 1978. My parents and we go back generations on St. Croix and the Virgin Islands. I've been an artist, I would say, from a little girl and just put it aside for a while. But when I moved here, just the vibrancy and the colors of the islands just led me back to wanting to do art. Those colors just drew me. I started doing some cards, and my cards escalated to larger formats, and that's where I am since I guess 1980.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I just recently had a retrospective of 40 years of my art at the museum, the Caribbean Center for the Arts in Frederiksted, back in October in 2023.
And it was quite an exhibition, I must say. Pedra, tell us about yourself, please.
I am originally from Louisiana, grew up in Michigan, and I have made art for as long as I can remember. I went to university and studied art, majored in art and teaching. So I'm currently an art educator. I've also done museum education. And I came to St. Croix in 2001. I was here for about 12 years. I moved back stateside 2012.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any family ties to St. Croix, but I feel like I'm Crucian kind of by default. But I spent the bulk of my time here teaching at the Good Hope School, lower and middle school art. So I was able to continue my teaching practice here on St. Croix. And the time that I had, kind of the slower pace, really allowed me to pursue my own work much more diligently. And I had already started working with beads, and coming here with the colors of the tropics and traditions of carnival, I really, really got into my beadwork, which is what I'm currently doing and which is what's on view in the show.
Okay. Well, I would imagine working with beads is a very, technical, patient process. And I've seen the beads that you work with, and they're quite small, aren't they not?
Yes, everybody says that to me. They say, "Oh, you must be so patient." I don't think I'm a patient person, but I find working with the beads very therapeutic. So for me, it's not work. You kind of get into a zone when you're, in that creative process. So for me, it's a material like anything else, like paint or anything else. But I really like the end result. I like the way they look. They're very attractive to the eye. And because they're small, they really make you come in close to the artwork, which I like.
Okay. So, Elisa, in addition to, you're both teachers, because at least you had a background of teaching in the local schools as well, correct?
Yes. Excuse me, I did. In fact, I taught when I was in New York. I was in a different work environment. For many years, I was in data processing, and I taught IBM key punch and typing. And then when I knew that I was going to move down to St. Croix, I went back to school and I majored in English. I minored in secondary education. And I taught at the Central High School. I taught English 9th, mostly 11th grade. I loved the 11th grade curriculum. I taught that. And then I left for a leave, and I also was employed at the University of the Virgin Islands. I tutored freshmen in English skills. But when I was teaching, and I'd be grading papers in the evening, just the rigors of reading essays and research papers and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of helped when I started making those cards. It just put me in like a Zen zone, it was a meditation for me, cutting and gluing and that was my initiation into the collage art that I've been doing. So I'm self-taught. I have taken a couple of classes with people like Cynthia Hatfield and Danica David and oh, trying to think of who else, Nyaris Walker at the university. Yeah, they
Mm-hmm.
had adult classes that they offered seniors. And at one time I did take a couple of those classes. But basically I'm self-taught.
And your medium is as you described, is fabric and flowers and.
Well, yeah, fabric. I really mixed media,
Mm-hmm.
found objects. I'm just trying to think of what I have that might be found in this exhibit. But, I've just used flowers, I've used shells. In my cards, I've used ribbon and flowers. But in my larger pieces, I've used at one time I had a feeling for copper. I did a couple of pieces using copper wire. A varied amount or a varied array of objects I've used,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
throughout the years.
Now, Pedro, one of the things I saw, again, doing just some background review, is that you had co-authored a book entitled Lucasas, a Luba memory board. What can you
Yeah,
tell us about that?
well, I used to be an education specialist at the National Museum of African Art Smithsonian.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that entails doing educational programming for adults and children, but it also included exhibition publications. So when you go into an exhibit and they have information about the objects that you're looking at, sometimes they'll have something specifically for children. So I used to write some of those little public gallery, what they call gallery publications. So that was about a specific exhibit that was going on at the museum at that time about some art pieces from Central Africa.
Mm-hmm. So what is a memory board?
Memory board is a way that those particular people kept track of their history. So the lineages, the families, who was supposed to be a chief or a king and that sort of thing. And they were these small wooden objects with beads, and the beads were used to keep track of those things. So they were read by the person within the community who had that knowledge.
Where can somebody see something like that? Because that's very intriguing.
In a Museum of African Art,
Mm-hmm.
I think those were on loan from a museum in Europe. I'm trying to remember, but it was something that was a little bit not rare, but something you didn't normally see. So that was the reason they were having the exhibit, because it was something that hadn't been written about a lot.
Right.
But it's a traditional African art object.
Okay. So, Elisa, tell us about how this exhibition has come into fruition. Fabrics and Silhouettes, Generational Synergy.
Okay. And it's beads. You did say beads, right?
Yes.
Beads, fabric, and silhouettes. And we call it, excuse me, generational synergy, because Pedra and I are of two generations, although I'm kind of closer to hers. Anyway, we spoke, Pedra and I had developed a friendship, and several years ago, we and another person on island had spoken about doing an exhibit together. And with Pedra's beads and my fabric and the other artists worked in quilts, we thought we would do this exhibit, and it just never happened. And so that was like more than a decade ago. And then just recently, I just thought about it again, and I said, Pedra, what do you think? And she said, yeah. So we decided to just do two people. I kind of was thinking of a third person, and we realized that, especially, I guess Pedra said, no, let's stick with two. And I think it's easier for two people to do something together than three. Just trying to get three people together might be a little more difficult. So that's what we decided. And originally, we were going to have the exhibit in December, and then we, spoke about it again with the gallery owner, and we moved it up to April, which was really a good thing, because Wine at the Warehouse was the exact day evening as our original itinerary. So it is opening April 17th, our Thursday. And that's where we are. Yeah, we just felt like, okay, we're gonna do this thing together. And it's been a joy. It's been a pleasure just, being around Pedra and seeing, I mean, I've always seen her work and loved it, but just seeing her go through the process, she's already done the work, but seeing her, frame it and just seeing it partially hung. I was at the gallery yesterday and just seeing our work together, it is a good feeling. Yeah.
Pedra, do you have any to add to what Elisa just said about the coming together of your show?
Well, I was going to say, when they say great minds think alike, I think it was one of those things. We were also very interested working with this particular gallery, Cane Roots Gallery. We were Elisa has exhibited there before. I haven't exhibited there because it opened after I had left Island. So I was very excited about being able to show in that space. And Sonia, the owner, has been extremely supportive in terms of helping us make this happen. I also think our work is very complementary to each other. It doesn't bang against each other. It's very harmonious, kind of just by fate that it works really well together. So I'm very excited about it.
The Cane Roots Art Gallery is located at 24 Company Street, and the phone number there is 340-718-4929. Again, the show will be open on April 17th, and it will be up until May 16th, so be sure not to miss it. It promises to be a very, very beautiful event. I guess, it's not an easy decision to make when somebody's trying to decide for themselves, how am I going to spend my life as a career? I guess, I don't know if that's a good word. I mean, I'm always curious as to how an individual can make the conscious decision that I am going to pursue art and that will be my focal point for most of my life. How does one do that? I mean, I think it takes a good bit of trust in yourself, courage, skill, maybe, but skill for sure. But how do you come to that? And what inspires you? And that's for both of you.
I would say for me, my father's an architect. My mother's a teacher. So they were very supportive of me being an artist. I never got the message that being an artist isn't something you should aspire to. All of the artists I knew, because we had some various family friends, all of the artists that I knew were teachers. So for me, that was the avenue to being an artist, that you were an artist in one part of your life and then you're a teacher in the other part, and you just try to maintain doing your own work. So for me, I really couldn't envision doing anything else. When I went to university, art was my major, but I went to university because I also have interest in history and political science, and I like to read. So I felt that a university environment would give me kind of that whole range. But I did remember thinking when I was coming out of high school and you tell people you're going to major in art, and they would have all kinds of responses like, you're going to starve, you're not going to make any money. And I remember thinking, if I told people I was going to be a lawyer, they would leave me alone. But when I tell them I want to be an artist, I get all this pushback, not from my family, but from other people. So I think that comes with the territory also. You have to kind of keep your own energy against that sort of perception of being an artist, I should say.
Right. And I think it takes a certain amount of confidence to say, I am an artist. I'm not.
And sometimes I have to remind myself, because you have points in your life where you're maybe not doing that much work. And part of what I use to kind of get myself going is, you can't tell people you're an artist if you're not doing work. If I'm not making something, I can't say I'm an artist. So, I'm an artist in the classroom. I'm helping, quote unquote, mold young minds. And that's one thing. But in terms of my own work, I really have to stay on myself about that.
Right. And I would imagine, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that the notion of self-promoting, marketing your work, that is another skill set, I would imagine, correct?
Very much so. And I'm not the best at it. I'm working to get better, but self-promotion is not something that I'm very good at. So that is a big part of it.
Yeah. I noticed, for example, that you do have, or you're part of a nonprofit organization called the Guild of artists and artisans. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
That's an organization. I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan. That's an organization related to a large art fair that they have every summer.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the largest art fairs in the country. And they're one of the organizations that coordinate that and put that event on. So I was a participant in the art fair for about 15 years.
Oh, okay. So, Lisa, how would you respond to the whole marketing piece?
Well, before the marketing, as I mentioned that I did art as a child, and they used to call me the family artist. All of us, in the era that I grew up in, of course, we had no cell phones, anything like that. But most of my peers, everyone seemed, we all drew. Everyone had pencils and crayons, and I don't know that we had markers yet, but everyone that I knew drew. And I used to draw the dimensions for my dad. Well, he'd give me the dimensions. He was a carpenter, a musician all his life, but also as a young man on St. Croix, he was learned carpentry and cabinet making. And so when he'd have clients, I would draw he'd give me the dimensions, and I'd draw whatever it was that he was going to make as the carpenter. And when I was about 8 years old, the child star Margaret O'Brien is born the same year and a few days apart from my birthday in January. And her face was on the Daily News in New York. And I drew a a portrait of her from that picture that I saw in the paper. And when my dad saw it, I was like 8 years old. And he said, "Oh my God." He said, "That's great. Send it to her." And I said, "Oh no, Daddy, that's not real art." Because I thought it didn't come from my head or my heart. I
Mm-hmm.
was copying it. Anyway, I did send it to her. He insisted, and she sent me back an autographed 8x10 glossy. And I had it all these years from 1945, and I lost it in Hugo. But since then, as I said that I started making cards here on St. Croix, I I I am not a marketing person per se, but a friend of mine kind of pushed me to sell cards on St. Croix.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with her in New York, and I used to send her, a little package of my cards for her birthday or an anniversary. And would, she'd ask me, "How much are they?" And I said, "I'm not selling them. I'm giving them to you." She said, "No, I want you to sell them to me because I want to give them away, as gifts." So we figured a price, and she kept pushing me to sell them on St. Croix. And I went to Mickey Silver at Compass Rose. I don't know if you remember that store on Company Street.
I do.
And I
Mhm.
asked her, would she sell my cards? And we figured, an amount that she would get and that I would get. And that's where it started. And from then on, I mean, people kind of asked me
Mhm.
more than I went to them, but there's about 5 outlets on St. Croix that sell my cards and my prints. So I don't know that I'm a good marketer, but when people like what I do and they, like these retailers, and they come to me, I'm like, "Okay, I'm ready, I'll do it." But I'm not good at pricing so well, it takes a while to figure it out because that's kind of a chore to figure the time you put in, the materials you use, and all of that.
Right. Well, again, it's our guest today, Elisa McKay and Pedra Chaffers, and they are doing a two-woman show called Beads, Fabric, and Silhouettes, Generational Synergy at the Cane Roots Art Gallery, now till May 16th. And the Cane Roots Art Gallery is at 24 Company Street. And for more information, you can call at 340-718-4929. Now, are there any things that you would like to mention that a person who comes to your show may want to take a look at?
You mean the images that are being hung there that
Yes. Yes.
I would say for my work, they're all based on faces.
Mm-hmm.
So they all have eyes, but they're parts of faces. When I initially started doing the beads, I was kind of doing like a whole mask.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would find is that midway through, I would kind of get bored because I knew the other side would have to look pretty much the same.
Mm.
So I started doing parts of the faces, and that has kept me much more interested and energized. So I would basically say look for the faces.
Okay. Okay.
And on with mine, I've always done community, family, celebration, culture. And in this exhibit, and I think it was kind of a subconscious thing because we call it the subtitle is generational synergy. So in this exhibit, I do have generations. I have more family. I have children. I have several. I love to do work with children, the images of children. So they would see children. They would see adults. They'd see, yeah, more generational in my images this time.
Okay. One of the things I had read is that when it comes to, the generational piece that you're talking about, I believe, Elisa, I read that your collage figures don't have features necessarily, and that was, in your words, to stress the oneness of us all.
Yes, sometimes I give them here. If I do a profile, then you'd see a nose and a mouth,
Mhm.
but I very rarely do features because I feel like uh, you know the oneness of us all. I feel like we're all one, and of course the features. Someone might have brown eyes, blue eyes,
Right.
some straight hair, curly hair, kinky hair. That kind of thing. A broad nose, a pointed nose. But when they have none of those, it's that we're individualized expressions of God,
Mhm.
and that's that's what I do.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. No, that's profound, Elisa. I like that. It's very good. Now, you mentioned that you had a one-woman retrospective at the Caribbean Museum of the Arts, and you've also shown your work at other locations, correct? In St. Thomas, at the Reichel Center for the Arts?
Yes, with my dad.
Mhm.
Mhm.
What other
And
places?
another oh boy, Yvonne, all of a sudden, I can't remember her last name, but this was in 1994 at the Reichel Center.
Mhm.
Vika had asked us to show our work. My father had become a visual artist at age 90. I don't know if you want me to mention why he became a visual
Well,
artist.
sure. I mean,
Oh,
I'm
okay.
encouraged. Let's hope for us all.
Okay. Well, he was a musician all his life and a carpenter and cabinet maker. And he and my mom had been married 65 years. And
Mm.
when she passed, of course, he was in mourning. And he had one time gone to the senior center and he said that they were a little too old for him. And he's in his 80s then.
Mhm.
And so when my mom passed, I asked him, did he want to go back to the senior center? And he said no. And Leo Cardi and several other artists were doing adult classes for seniors. And I said to him, would you like to take an art class? And he said, I don't think so.
Mhm.
And so the more we spoke about it, the more he kind of opened up and was open and receptive. And so he became a visual artist at age 90 and just did a lot of art. He did one man shows, sold a lot of his work. And yeah, so he he did that exhibit with Yvonne and I and my dad at Reichel Center. And then later, that was 1994, and Cindy Mail was teaching art at the country day school. And she had asked my dad, and she asked me, and she asked African Southwell, the three of us, to put on a show at Country Day for Black History Month in 1996. Well, we all said yes, and my dad had worked for it, but he passed in October 1995. So we did do the exhibit, but it was with, the work, with
Mhm.
his work. He was there in spirit.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Now, Pedro, where else have you exhibited your art?
I've exhibited on St. Croix when I was living here,
Mhm.
and other than, well, the art fair was my primary place for many years to show my work and sell my work. I've done a little bit in the DC area, in Virginia and Maryland, but I'm still finding my footing and finding opportunities to show. It's a little bit different in a bigger area. You have to kind of search out things a little bit more, but I'm in the process of doing that. But again, you have to have the work to present to, come to people and ask about exhibiting.
Right, right. And you've done some training or some teaching at the Caribbean Museum of the Arts, correct? Here in St. Croix?
Not recently. I did a few things when I was living here, but not recently.
Okay. Okay. Well, we're going to
But
have
I
to.
do workshops with children. I mean, that's an extension of my professional teaching. But I do workshops with kids, any kind of art. I enjoy working with young people. The age I teach right now is elementary school, pre-K through fifth grade, and that has its own joys.
Yes, I'm sure. Our guest today, thank you so much, is Elisa McKay and Pedra Chaffers. They're doing a two-women show called Beads, Fabric, and Silhouettes, Generational Synergy at the Cane Roots Art Gallery, and that's now till May 16th. The gallery is located at 24 Company Street, Christiansted. Phone number 340-718-4929. Don't miss it. It's going to be a fantastic, fantastic show. Elisa and Pedra, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today, and much success to you both. Looking forward to seeing your show.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Enjoyed this.
Thank you,
Yes.
ladies, and thank you, our listening audience. This was Ability Radio. Take care. Bye-bye.
The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.